We're reading the Book of Five Rings, the classic text of samurai sword strategy by Miyamoto Musashi, translated by we're on the Earth Book. This is recorded for the first time in the 5 books of Earth, Water, Fire, Wind, and Void. Here is the way for those who want to learn my strategy. 1. Do not think dishonestly. 2. The way is to train. 3. Have knowledge of every art. 4. Know the ways of all professions. 5. Know the difference between profit and loss in worldly matters. 6. Develop intuition and an understanding of all things. 7. See that which cannot be seen. 8. Attend even to the seemingly insignificant. 9. Do nothing which is useless. It is important to begin by engraving these principles upon your heart and training in the way of strategy. If you do not look at the broad scale of these things, it will be difficult for you to master the strategy. If you learn to understand this strategy, you will never be defeated, not even when battling 20 or 30 enemies. The most important thing is to immerse yourself completely in the strategy and to adhere to the way. And then you will become able to defeat men in war to be the victor. By practicing, you will be able to attain full mastery over your body and to influence men with your body. If you train well, you will be able to strike men with the power of your spirit. When you have reached this height, does this not mean you are invincible? In addition, in general strategy, the man who comes out superior will be he who manages his underlings with flexibility, bears himself correctly, governs his country, and cares for the people, and preserves the discipline of the rulers. If there exists an invincible way in which to gain honor for oneself, it is the way of strategy. The Water Book. The spirit of the Ishi school of strategy has water as its basis. The Water Book explains methods of victory according to the long sword part of the Ishi school. There are no words to explain in detail this way, but it can be understood intuitively. Study this book. Read each word and pore over it. If you do not grasp the meaning deeply, you will be mistaken in the way. The principles of strategy are written here in relation to single combat, but you must think in general terms so you will be able to use and understand these principles. What is it? Oh, it's frogs. You see them? I can't see them. It's frogs. These principles for battles in which tens of thousands are on each side. Strategy for the way differs from other strategies for other things. If you make a mistake in the way, even if the mistake is very small, you are liable to become confused and go in wrong ways. You will not attain the way of strategy by simply reading this book. You must internalize the writings of this book. Do not be satisfied just with reading, memorizing, or copying, but to absorb these things deeply into your heart. You must understand the principles with your body. Spiritual behavior and strategy. In strategy, you must not behave spiritually any differently than usual in fighting as in day-to-day life. You must be of calm and determined mind. Do not allow your mind to become slack, however, or your body to relax. Your body should not relax in correspondence with your mind, and your mind must remain resolute when the body is calm. Keep control of your mind and do not allow your spirit to weaken. Men of small stature must thoroughly know and understand the body and spirit of men of larger stature. Likewise, large men must understand the spirit of men who are smaller. No matter what your physical size, always keep your mind in check and know the difference between good and bad actions. Do not allow yourself to be deceived. When you have studied the ways, you will know the wisdom of strategy. The wisdom of strategy is unique. Even when involved in difficult battle, never cease to learn the principles of strategy so that your spirit will remain steady. Posture and strategy. Assume a posture with head held erect, not with head bowed, not with head hanging, and not with head turned up, down, or sideways. Do not furrow your brow. Do not roll your eyeballs or blink your eyes, but narrow your eyelids slightly. Keep your face composed and keep the line of your nose straight. Flare your nostrils slightly. Hold the back of your neck straight. Infuse your neck with strength and let it travel down by way of your shoulders to the rest of your body. Keep the back erect and do not allow the buttocks to protrude. Infuse your legs with strength from knees to toes. Extend your abdomen so that you do not bend at the hips. Tighten your accompanying sword in your belt against your stomach. Oh, this is called wedging. In all types of strategy, you must assume this combat posture and make it your regular posture. You must study it well. Use the gaze in strategy. Oh, that's fierce. Use the eyes in a broad manner. There are two aspects of sight: perception and seeing. Perception is strong and seeing is weak. It is vital to see things which are at a distance as if they were close, and things which are close as if they were at a distance, as if they were far away. It is vital in strategy to know the opponent's sword, but not to look at it and observe its every movement. Your gaze should be the same for single combat as for large battles. It's important to be able to see both sides without moving the eyes. You will not be able to master this in a short time. Study what is written in this book and practice this gaze in everyday life without moving the eyes under any circumstances. Holding the sword. In order to hold a sword, your thumb and forefinger should float while your middle finger is neither tight nor slack, and the other two fingers are kept tight. It is bad to have slack in the hands. When you pick up a sword, you must be intent on cutting down your enemy. There should be no change in your grip as you do so. When you come at the enemy's sword to parry it or strike it down, your thumb and forefinger must move a bit and change their feel. Most importantly, you must keep a hold of your sword with the intentions of cutting the enemy. The grip you use for testing of new swords or for fighting is the same. There is no special grip for cutting a man. Always with swords, as with hands, fixedness is not desirable. The hands must be mobile. A fixed hand is a dead hand. A flexible hand is a live hand. You must keep this in mind. Footwork. Floating your toes inward, dig your heels in firmly. The use of the feet should be as usual, whether you move quickly or slowly. You should use a normal walking movement. I do not approve of jumping, floating the feet, or inflexible steps. The yin-yang foot is very important in the way. The yin-yang foot means never moving only one foot. It means you must move left and right and left when you are cutting, withdrawing, or fitting off a slash. You should not prefer to use only one foot. That is a robin there. I'm pretty sure. Isn't that a robin, Bruno? On the rocks? The 5 stances. The 5 stances are upper, middle, lower, left side, and right side. These are the 5, all for the purpose of cutting down the enemy. There are no other stances than these 5. Whichever stance you assume, you must not think of the stance, but only of the intention of cutting the enemy. Assume a large or small stance according to the situation. The upper, middle, and lower stances are decisive, and the side stances are flexible. The left and right stances should be assumed when there is something overhead or to one side. Decide which to use according to the location of the object. In order to fully comprehend the stances, you must thoroughly grasp the middle stance, which is the preferred stance. The middle stance is the main stance. Speaking generally, the middle stance is the commander, while the other 4 stances are the followers of the commander. You must understand this completely. The 5 approaches. The 5 approaches must be learned through repeated training with the sword. When these are mastered, you will be able to offset every attack of the enemy. There is none other than these 5 approaches, and they must be practiced. The approaches can be taken with variations in mood and timing. With continuous training, you will understand them and you will always win using the ways of the sword. Practice faithfully. The first approach. Assume the middle stance. Encounter your opponent with the point of your sword aimed right at his face. When you make contact with your opponent and he attacks, deflect his sword to the right. Next, hit downward so that his sword remains upward, returns upward, and keep your sword in the downward position. When he attacks again, strike at the enemy's arms from below. The second approach. Assume the upper stance and attack the enemy at the exact moment that he strikes out at you. Should you miss, hold the position of your sword as is and strike again by bringing it upwards as the opponent attacks again. This same strike can then be repeated. The third approach. Assume the lower stance. Be ready to attack your opponent from below. When the enemy advances, strike upward at his hands. Your opponent may then try to dash your sword down. If so, let his strike pass by and then cut his upper arm. Staying in the lower stance, you attack at the same moment he strikes out. The lower stance is appropriate for beginners and those more advanced and should be practiced often with the long sword. The fourth approach. Assume the left side stance. Hit your opponent's hands from below as he attacks. As he moves to deflect your strike, concentrate on hitting his hands and parry the path of his sword. Cut crosswise from above your shoulder. This is the way of the sword. It is a way to defeat your opponent by parrying the path of his attack. You should carefully study this. The fifth approach. Assume the right side stance with your sword to your right. As your enemy approaches, move your sword from the lower side to the upper position. Then immediately slash straight downward. This approach will facilitate your knowing the way of the sword well. If you practice this method, you will be able to deftly handle a heavy long sword. I have not written about the 5 approaches in detail. You must come to know my style and general rhythm and harmony in order to anticipate the opponent's sword's direction. To be practiced in the 5 approaches, you must train in them daily. By seriously understanding these 5 approaches, you will be assured of victory by discerning your opponent's intent. This must be considered carefully. Whichever your stance may be, do not focus your attention on the matter of the stance. Concentrate only on the cut. The stance should be high or low in accordance with the situation. The upper, lower, and middle stances are decisive. The right and left side stances are flowing. The left and right side stances must be used when there's an obstacle above the head or to one side. The decision to use left or right depends on the location of the obstacle. The essence of the way is, in order to understand the principle of the stance, you must grasp well the middle stance. The middle stance is the heart. If we look at wide-reaching strategy, the middle stance is the commander, and the 4 others follow the commander. This should be appreciated. The way of the long sword. Knowing the way of the long sword entails knowing how to wield the sword with 2 fingers rather than carrying it in the usual manner. If we are well aware of the path of the sword, we are able to handle it with ease. If you try to wield the long sword quickly, you will be mistaken in the way. In order to control the long sword efficiently, you must maintain calmness. If you try to wield it speedily, as you would a fan or a short sword, you will find yourself using by mistake short sword chopping. You will not be able to cut a person with the long sword using this method. Stance - no stance instructions. Stance, no stance means that there's no need for what are referred to as the stances of the long sword. However, there are 5 ways of holding the long sword. The way you hold your sword must be that which makes it easiest for you to cut the enemy well, taking into account your situation, location, relative to the enemy. When your energy dips, you can switch from the upper to the middle stance. From there, lift the sword slightly and move to the middle stance as the need calls for it. Depending on the situation, either of the two side stances can become the middle. Stance or lower stance by moving a bit toward the center. The most important principle when taking a sword into your hands is to cut down your enemy by whatever means need to be applied to this end. Whether you parry, strike, hit, hold, or touch your enemy's cutting sword, you must cut the enemy in the same motion. This is essential. If you think only of hitting, holding, springing at, or striking the enemy, this will not be sufficient to cut him down. You must think first and foremost about performing the motion which will bring about cutting him. You must study this matter thoroughly. To hit the enemy in 1 count. The significance of 1 count is that when you have closed in on the enemy, you hit him as swiftly and directly as you can, without moving your body or changing your mind, so as not to give the enemy time to consider his next moves. Timing the hitting of the enemy before he can decide to withdraw, break, or hit is called 1 count. You must practice in order to achieve this timing so that you will be able to attack instantaneously. Two count timing. When you quickly hit your opponent and he retreats only to tense for a further attack, you must feint a slash. And then when he relaxes, chase after him and hit him. This is the 2 count timing. It is difficult to achieve this simply by reading this book, but with the help of several lessons, you will come to understand it. No plan, no concept. With this method, when the enemy strikes, and you also decide to strike, you hit with your body and with your spirit, and your hands strike out of a void, emerging instantaneously. This is the no plan, no concept strike. It is a very effective method of hitting, and it's often used. You must practice it well in order to understand it. Running water strike. The running water strike is used when fighting an enemy blade to blade. When he tires and retreats quickly and tries to hit you with his sword, you must expand your body and your spirit and cut him as slowly as possible with your long sword, using your power as that of water from a flowing stream. You will certainly be able to cut if you master this. You must discern your enemy's advantage. Continuous cut. When you and the enemy attack simultaneously and your swords meet, hit his head, hands, and feet all in one motion. When you cut in several places with one sword stroke, this is called the continuous cut. You must practice this. It is used with great frequency. You must put it into practice until you are able to understand it. Fire and stone cut. The fire and stone cut is used when your sword and the enemy's sword cross and you cut as strongly as possible without raising your sword, even the slightest bit. Cut quickly and strongly with your hands, body, and legs. If you practice well, you will be able to cut with great force. Red leaf cut. The red leaf cut is knocking the enemy's sword to the ground and taking control of it for yourself. When the enemy stands before you intent on striking, hitting, or parrying, you must strongly strike at the enemy's long sword using the no plan, no concept strike or the fire and stone cut. Keep beating down his sword without letting up until he is forced to drop it to the ground. If you train this way, it will become easy for you to cause the enemy to relinquish his sword. You must practice this over and over. The body in place of the long sword. This can also be called the long sword in place of the body. Usually we move the body and sword with synchronization in order to cut the enemy. However, in accordance with the system of cutting which the enemy is using, you can attack him first with your body and cut him afterwards. If it is not possible to move his body, you can first cut with the long sword, but generally you should hit first with your body and then cut with the sword. You must investigate this well and practice this type of hit. The cut and the slash. The cut and the slash are distinct from each other. The cut is decisive and done with a brave spirit. The slash is simply a touching of the enemy. Even if the slash is a strong one and the enemy dies, it is still a slash. With your cut, the spirit is resolute and set. You must understand this. If at first you slash the feet or the hand of your opponent, if at first you slash the hand or foot of your opponent, you must afterwards strongly cut him. Slashing is similar to touching. When you come to realize this, it becomes recognizable. Study this thoroughly. The body of the Chinese monkey. The body of the Chinese monkey is a tactic of not stretching out one's arms. The spirit is to rush in quickly as the enemy prepares to strike without extending your arms even a bit. You purposely do not stretch out your arms. The idea is to approach and strike with your entire body. When you come within arm's reach of the enemy, it will be easy to approach with your body. Investigate this well. The glue and lacquer body. The essence of the glue and lacquer body tactic is to come close to your enemy's body and to effectively stick to him. When you approach the enemy, attach yourself firmly to his head, his body, and his legs. There's a tendency to stick only to the head or feet and leave out the rest of the body. You should stick firmly, leaving no space between your body and the enemy's. Think over this carefully. Contest of height. The contest of height means that when you are in proximity of the enemy, you must strive to maintain the height advantage with no let up. Extend your legs, stretch your hips, and stretch your neck, keeping your face aligned with his, intent on winning or being taller. When you feel you have the height advantage, hold strongly to it. You must make great effort to learn this. Applying glue. When you and your enemy strike simultaneously. You must attach your sword to his and hold your swords together so that they do not separate, and you absorb his blow. The spirit of sticking to your opponent's sword as if it is glued is not to hit out with great strength. Rather, the point is to make it impossible for the swords to separate easily. Impossible for the swords to separate easily. Do this as calmly as you can while adhering strongly to the enemy's sword. The difference between gluing and entanglement is that gluing is steadfast and entanglement is weak. This must be appreciated. The body strike. The body strike is delivered when the enemy lets down his guard momentarily. Turn your face slightly sideways and strike at the enemy's chest, while thrusting your left shoulder outwards. Come toward the opponent with the intention of repelling him and strike as mightily as possible in rhythm with your breathing. If you succeed with this method of closing in on the enemy, you'll be able to throw him back a distance of over 10 or 20 feet. You can strike a fatal blow in this manner. Practice faithfully. 3 ways to parry the enemy's attack. There are 3 ways to parry an attack. Push the enemy's sword to your right as if towards his eyes as he attacks. Thrust the enemy's sword toward his right eye as if snapping his neck. Or, when you have a short sword, move in quickly towards the enemy and hit his face with your left hand. These are the 3 methods of parrying. Always keep in mind that you can use your left fist to punch at the enemy's face. It is necessary to practice hard for this. Stabbing the face means when you're in confrontation with the enemy, you set your spirit with the intention of stabbing your sword into his face. The tip of your long sword following the line of his blade. If you remain intent on stabbing your long sword into his face and body will be pulled into control. Once the enemy is under control, you will have several opportunities to beat him. You must concentrate on this. When during the battle the enemy's body becomes controllable, you can quickly be victorious. And so you mustn't forget to stab the sword into his face. You should acquire this important skill through practice. Stabbing the heart. When during a fight there are obstacles above or to the sides making it difficult to cut, you must thrust it at your opponent. You must stab your long sword into the breast of the enemy without letting the point of your sword waver. With the blade of the sword before the enemy's eyes and with the intent to deflect his long sword sideways. This principle is very efficient should you become tired or for some other reason your long sword has difficulty cutting. You should understand the use of this method. Scolding, tut-tut. When the enemy tries to counterattack just as you attack, you again counterattack from below and try to hold him down. You cut with a quick rhythm, scolding the enemy as you thrust up, yell tut, and cut, yell tut again. The timing for this cut is used repeatedly in exchanges of blows. You should yell the scolding tut tut at the same moment that you raise your sword as if to thrust at the enemy. You must learn this well by training repeatedly. The slapping parry. The slapping parry is carried out when you are up against the enemy and you absorb his attacking cut with your long sword with a ta-dum, ta-dum rhythm while slapping at his sword and cutting him. The spirit of the slapping parry is not simply slapping fiercely or parrying, but slapping the enemy's sword in accordance to his attack, when your intent is first and foremost to cut him quickly. If you understand the timing of the slapping, even during the most difficult of sword battles, the blade of your sword will not be repelled even slightly. You must study this to understand it. There are many enemies. The "there are many enemies" method is put into practice when you are one fighting against many. Draw your sword and also its accompanying sword and use the right and left stances. The idea is to go after the enemies from side to side, even though they may come from all four directions. Pay attention to the order of their attack and counter those who attack first. Take in your surroundings well and make note of the attacking order. Cut right to left alternatively with two swords. Waiting is not desirable. Always return quickly to the two side stances. Cut the enemy as he advances and repel him to the direction from which he starts to attack. Whatever you do, you must crash the enemy together as if you were tying a line of fish. When it seems they are piled together, cut them fiercely, giving them no room to move. The advantage when exchanging blows. You can learn to win by using the strategy of the long sword, but to explain it clearly in writing is not possible. You must train industriously in order to know how to be victorious. According to the oral tradition, the true way of strategy is revealed by the long sword. One cut. You will be able to win using the one cut. It will be hard to achieve this without learning strategy thoroughly. If you practice well in this way, strategy will flow from your mind and you will have the ability to win according to your will of mind. You should practice thoroughly. Direct communication. The spirit of direct communication has been transmitted as the true way of two swords. According to oral tradition, you must train thoroughly and make it part of your body. The Ni-ju Ishi school teaches the Ishi school way of sword fighting. In order to learn to win using the long sword strategically, first you must learn the 5 stances and the 5 approaches, and to incorporate the way of the long sword into your body. You must be in harmony with intent and rhythm and wield your sword with natural movements of your body and legs as they work together harmoniously with your mind. Being able to beat one enemy or two will depend on your knowledge of the martial arts. Study what is in this book, one line at a time, and practice with opponents until you grasp fully the principle of the way. Patiently and deliberately learn the value of all of this, taking part in combat occasionally. Know your enemy's mind, whoever he may be. You make a journey of 1,000 miles by taking step after step. With study and over time, you will achieve the spirit of a warrior. You will surpass today what you accomplished yesterday, and tomorrow you will go further still until you will be able to vanquish more highly skilled men. Train according to this book and don't allow your mind to get off track. No matter what opponent you may manage to defeat, it will not be the true way if you do not do it according to these teachings. If you retain these principles in mind, you will know how to beat even 10 opponents. You need also a strong knowledge of swordsmanship, so mind that you allow yourself many practice battles and duels. The Fire Book. In the Fire Book of Ishii School of Strategy, I refer to fighting as fire. Firstly, people tend to think of the less important aspects of military strategy, such as the 3 to 4 inch advantage of the wrist over the fingertips. They think a contest is decided within the span of the forearms, like the folding of a fan. They become expert at the insignificant matter of dexterity and concentrate on minor aspects, such as practicing hand and leg movements with a bamboo sword. With my strategy, training for killing opponents is done over the course of many battles. The meaning of life and death is discovered through practice in the way of the sword and knowing the strength of our opponent's attack and understanding the ways of the edge and the back of the sword. You do not need to employ insignificant techniques when you are dressed in full armor. My way of strategy is a proven method of victory when you are battling for your life against one man, or against 5, or against 10. There's no difference between the principles with which one man beats 10 or with which 1,000 beat 10,000. You must consider this. Of course, it's not ordinarily possible to train with 1,000 or 10,000 men. However, you can learn your enemy's strategy and his strengths and weaknesses by training by yourself with sword in hand, and you will absorb the principles of beating 10,000 men in this manner. Whoever desires to become expert at my strategy must study hard and train constantly, morning and evening. He must polish his skill, be independent of self, and obtain a superb ability. He will then attain miraculous power. This is the result of practicing my strategy. About place. Ascertain the conditions of your environment. Stand with the sun behind you. If you cannot have the sun at your back, then stand with the sun to your right side. Indoors, stand with the light from the entrance behind you or to your right side. Stand so there's no obstruction to your rear, so that there's room to your left. Your right side is taken up with your sword stance. At night, keep fire behind you and the light from the entrance to your right, so as to be able to see your enemy. Look down at your opponent by standing in a